In the world of true crime, few figures are as controversial, feared, and paradoxically mythologized as Pedro Rodrigues Filho, better known as Pedrinho Matador, or Killer Petey. Born in Brazil in 1954, he would become one of the most infamous serial killers in Latin America, claiming to have taken more than 100 lives. His story is violent, disturbing, and deeply complex. And over the years, the way he chose his victims, often targeting criminals, led many to compare him to fictional vigilantes, most notably Dexter Morgan from the American TV series Dexter. While the show was not officially inspired by Pedrinho, the parallels are striking enough that the association persists. This is not a tale of heroism. This is a story of trauma, vengeance, brutality, and the blurred lines between justice and murder. Early life. A childhood marked by violence. Pedro Rodrigues Filho was born on October 17, 1954, in Santa Rita do Sapucaí, Minas Gerais. His life began under the shadow of violence. While still in his mother's womb, Pedro was beaten by his father, an act so severe that it left the infant with a dented skull. From the very first moment of his existence, the world around him was defined not by protection, but by brutality. Pedro grew up in a dysfunctional household ravaged by domestic violence. He witnessed frequent fights, threats, and abuse. His father, who served as a security guard, was known for his aggressive temper. The environment fostered anger, hypervigilance, and an early familiarity with cruelty. Many criminologists later suggested that Pedro's early brain injuries, combined with severe trauma, may have played a role in shaping his path. But explanations are not excuses. They are only the beginning of a story drenched in blood. The first kill, a teenager's act of vengeance. Pedro's first murder happened before he even turned 14 years old. After his father was fired from his job at the local school, accused of stealing food, Pedro took matters into his own hands. Fueled by rage and a distorted sense of justice, he hunted down the man who had accused his father. And he killed him. Shortly after, he targeted another guard, someone he believed was equally responsible for the accusation. Pedro was still just a teenager, yet already capable of cold, calculated homicide. This moment marked the irreversible start of his violent legacy. It was no longer about survival. It was retribution. A self-declared vigilante, killing criminals. After fleeing to São Paulo, Pedro entered the criminal underworld. But his targets were not always innocent. In fact, he often pursued those he believed were corrupt, violent, or predatory. This pattern created a disturbing, morally ambiguous persona. A killer who claimed he was cleansing the world of bad people. A killer who saw himself as a twisted agent of justice. In Mogi das Cruzes, Pedro began working for local drug traffickers and small gangs. But even within crime, he maintained his personal code. He killed thieves, traitors, abusers, and those he deemed immoral. In one particularly notorious incident, Pedro executed multiple people during a revenge spree after his girlfriend, Maria Aparecida Olimpia, was murdered by rival criminals. He believed he was righting a wrong, but his justice was delivered with unrestrained violence. This vigilante killer profile is what later caused comparisons to Dexter Morgan, a fictional forensic analyst who murders criminals. While purely coincidental, both figures operated under a personal moral code that permitted killing only those deemed guilty. The Mogi das Cruzes blood feud. But Pedro's campaign of personal justice did not unfold quietly. Before his arrest, one of the most dramatic and violent episodes of his life took place in the city of Mogi das Cruzes. A confrontation that would cement his reputation as a ruthless, unpredictable vigilante. After the murder of his girlfriend, Maria Aparecida Olimpia, Pedro became consumed by rage. He believed that her death had been ordered by members of a local criminal group, one involved in extortion, petty trafficking, and contract violence. In Pedro's mind, they were not just criminals. They were predators who had taken away the only person he felt truly connected to. Driven by a desire for revenge, Pedro didn't simply seek out one culprit. He planned a retaliation that would target everyone he believed was involved, directly or indirectly. According to later accounts, Pedro investigated the group the way a detective might. He observed their routines, identified leaders, and waited for an opportunity. That opportunity came during a gathering, a kind of meeting or small party, attended by several members of the gang. Pedro invaded the event armed and prepared, shooting multiple people in rapid succession. Witnesses described chaos, shouting, bodies falling before anyone could react. It wasn't a random attack. It was a calculated assault on those he viewed as responsible for Maria's death. Some reports suggest he killed at least 7 people that day. Others claim the number was higher. What is certain is that the event became one of the most violent incidents associated with him. But even after escaping the scene, Pedro did not stop. He continued tracking down individuals linked to the organization, people who he believed betrayed Maria or participated in covering up her murder. This episode became something like a turning point. Pedro was no longer simply a teenager seeking justice. He became a figure operating outside any moral framework recognized by society, a lone executioner rewriting the rules according to his own pain. In interviews decades later, he described the event with an unsettling mix of coldness and conviction. For Pedro, it was not murder. He saw it as vengeance, even purification, eliminating what he perceived as evil. But for the public and authorities, it was a massacre that revealed the full extent of his capacity for violence. The Mogi das Cruzes retaliation solidified his identity. A man willing to kill not just individuals, but entire groups, if he believed they deserved it. A man guided by rage, trauma, and a distorted sense of justice. And a man rapidly spiraling into a life from which there would be no return. This was the event that put him definitively on law enforcement's radar, and ultimately set the stage for his arrest, and for the next, even darker chapter of his story. His years inside Brazil's prison system. Prison, a kingdom of violence. Pedro was arrested in 1973. At just 19 years old, he had already committed numerous killings. But what happened next would cement his legacy as one of Brazil's deadliest serial killers. Inside prison, Pedro continued to kill. Over the years, he murdered dozens of inmates. Some official reports list 47 confirmed kills within prison walls, while Pedro himself claimed far more. His victims were often rapists, murderers, gang members, and anyone he perceived as predatory or treacherous. To many, this made him a monster. To others, a vigilante. To Pedro, it was simply cleaning the cell. One of the most infamous episodes was when Pedro murdered a fellow inmate, his own father, who had been arrested for killing Pedro's mother with a machete. Pedro not only killed him, but mutilated his corpse in a fit of rage. This macabre act highlighted the depth of Pedro's trauma and the uncontrollable violence within him. The media, the myth, and the comparisons to Dexter. By the 1980s, Pedrinho Matador had become a media phenomenon in Brazil. Newspapers portrayed him as a monster, a vigilante, a curiosity, sometimes all three at once. Decades later, international audiences began comparing him to fictional moral killers, especially Dexter Morgan. Both targeted criminals, both operated with personal codes, and both blurred the lines between justice and murder. Although the creators of Dexter have never cited Pedro as an inspiration, the parallels continue to fascinate viewers and true crime communities. But one key difference remains. Dexter is fiction. Pedro was real, and his victims were real people. Release, life outside prison, and final years. Pedro spent most of his life behind bars, more than 40 years. He was eventually released in 2007, rearrested shortly after for past charges, and released again in 2018. In his later years, he surprised many by appearing on YouTube, speaking about crime prevention, redemption, and his past. He claimed he regretted many of his actions and wanted to steer young people away from violence, but opinions about him remained divided. Was this genuine remorse? Or simply another layer of the complicated persona Pedro had built over decades? His life ended in 2023, when he was killed by unknown assailants. Even in death, violence surrounded him. A legend built on tragedy. The story of Pedrinho Matador is not one of justice, nor redemption, nor villainy alone. It is a portrait of cyclical violence, born from trauma, shaped by brutality, and defined by blood. He was a killer who killed killers. A man who believed he could balance the scales of morality through murder. A figure compared to fictional vigilantes, yet far more disturbing because he was real. His story serves not as admiration, but as a warning. Violence does not purify. Revenge does not heal. And even those who believe they are delivering justice can become the very monsters they claim to fight. Subscribe for more foreign criminal videos.